and stuff like that, is that we have in fact embedded within us something more than the accident of evolution, but something that God has in fact given, however twisted it might be. And so I think on the religious side of things, I can at least make a stronger case not only for why we should be moral, namely that there is a God who knows all things and says this is a good way to live, but I can even explain why atheists are in fact moral, and that is they're created in God's image.
I'll be right back. Christopher Hitchens, author of God is Not Great. Mark Roberts, author most recently, Can We Trust the Gospels? Their books are linked at HughHewitt.com. The conversation continues all day in the Great God Debate here on The Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. On the Great God Debate Day on The Hugh Hewitt Show, all the show given over to a conversation between Christopher Hitchens, best-selling author of God is Not Great, number one on the New York Times bestseller list last week, How Religion Poisons Everything, and Dr. Mark Roberts, author, published this week of Can We Trust the Gospels, also pastor, blogger extraordinaire. My first proposition, gentlemen, on what science and scientists tell us about God. That many fine scientists believe in God does not prove that God exists, and that many fine scientists do not believe in God does not prove that God does not exist. Two illustrations. Dr. Francis Cullen is the head of the Human Genome Project. He declared at the National Prayer Breakfast on the 1st of February of this year that, quote, I can't identify a single conflict between what I know as a rigorous scientist and what I know as a believer. And he condemned the increasingly shrill voices around us who argue that the scientific and spiritual worldviews are incompatible. I am here this morning to tell you that these are different ways of finding truth and are not only compatible, but they are wondrously complementary. There's also a new Walter Isaacson biography of Einstein, quotes many, many passages of the great physicist, including one that reads, I'm not an atheist, said Einstein. The problem involved is too vast for our limited minds. We are in a position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows something must have written those books. It does not know how. Christopher Hitchens, is my first proposition correct?
I actually don't think it is. I think that science has provided us with explanations for things that religion used to think it did explain. I think that has to be simply conceded. Not just about the origin of the cosmos, but about the origin of species, including our own, and the commonality, as shown by the Genome Project, between ourselves and other animals, and indeed other vegetables. But not other vegetables, I mean plant life. Our DNA is extraordinary in demonstrating that, and it simply abolishes the need to think about a prime mover.
Mark Roberts.
In other words, it's an optional belief. Dr. Collins is absolutely welcome to say he believes in God, and even though he can't seem to argue that as well as he does elsewhere, that he's a Christian. But it's, as I say in my book, it's an optional belief now. It's been optional ever since Laplace, when demonstrating the workings of the universe, was asked, well, there doesn't seem to be a God in this design of yours. He said, well, it actually operates perfectly well without that assumption. So you can make it if you want, but it's completely superfluous. It can't be integral to it. It doesn't explain anything. Einstein did say he was not an atheist, but he went on to say that he had no belief whatever in a personal God. He was a Spinozist, which is a very exact way of saying that you do not believe that God intervenes in human affairs.
Yes, and that is quoted.
And if you don't believe that God intervenes in human affairs, then I think you're not a Christian, because a theist may very well say, well, the order of the universe seems to imply some kind of authorship, but that's as far as one can go. Religion means you have to say you know what God wants and what is in his mind. For example, I don't understand why my partner in this discussion has such a modest job if he knows as much as to know that God gave me a conscience. I mean, if he has sources of information as extraordinary as that, he should be much better known than he is.
I think that Einstein goes on to say that he's almost a Calvinist. He's a determinist. He quotes at length that way. Mark Roberts, my proposition was, though, that the number of scientists agreeing or disagreeing on either side does not tell us anything, actually, given the multiplicity of views on this. Science has not proven or disproven God.
Well, there'd be several points to make. One is that though the majority of scientists do not have religious faith, according actually to a very fascinating recent study by a group of sociologists, about 40% of university scientists in this country have some kind of religious faith. About 60% don't. About half of those are atheists, half of those are agnostic, which is kind of fascinating. Part of what the study found, though, is that the correlation is very strong, not between what people believe as scientists, but how they were raised. In other words, those who were raised in atheistic homes continue to be atheistic. Those who were raised in religious homes continue to be religious, and that seems better to explain the nature of their faith or non-faith. But I would go back to something, and actually it's quoted, Christopher quotes it in his book by one of my professors at Harvard, Stephen Jay Gould, who spoke of religion and science in terms of non-overlapping magisteria. That is to say that science offers explanations of a certain sort. Religion offers explanations of a certain sort. I would agree with Christopher's assertion that when religion tries to make scientific explanation, it makes a mess of things. I would want to go further and say when science tries to go the other way, it makes a mess of things. And what we have is different ways of explaining behavior, different ways of explaining reality. I would argue that both can have validity. For example, consider my love for my children. I think it's real to talk about my feelings of love for my children. They are quite real. A materialist might say, no, that's simply a biochemical or molecular event happening in your brain. Well, I happen to believe it is a biochemical molecular event happening in my brain, but I also believe that my love for my children has a reality that kind of scientific approach can't get at. And so we need different ways to deal with reality. Science is extraordinarily helpful, but I think there's also a place for religion to fill in the blanks that science can never fill in.
Christopher. Could I just add one tiny thing?
Yes.
I obviously want everyone to go rush out and buy my book, but there is another book by Professor Victor Stenger that's recently been published called God, the Failed Hypothesis. Excuse me. He's a much better scientist than I am. Probably not as good, though, as Professor Stephen Jay Gould, a celebrated atheist. I must have very much envy you having had him as a professor. Here's an example of what I mean, then, since we've mentioned Einstein. What Einstein says is that the miraculous thing about the universe is that there aren't any miracles in it. That the beautiful thing about science, and particularly about physics, is its extraordinary regularity, symmetry, beauty, predictability, and so on. So that's the extraordinary thing, that miracles do not occur because this natural order is never disturbed. Now there, it seems to me, is a pretty flat contradiction. Who really would be a Christian if Christianity didn't claim that miracles could be worked by faith?
Now, I am reading from Walter Isaacson's biography on page 384. Einstein said, "Try and penetrate with our limited means the secrets of nature, and you will find that behind all the discernible laws and connection, there remains something subtle, intangible, and inexplicable. Veneration for this force, beyond anything that we can comprehend, is my religion. To that extent, in fact, I am religious." I think that contradicts, Christopher Hitchens, what you just said.
No, it doesn't at all, because do the religious say that these things cannot be explained? They do not. They say, well, there is a God, and we know what he wants.
Mark Roberts?
They make a claim they cannot conceivably sustain. And when challenged on it, they would say, well, of course you can't believe it if you don't have faith. This is irritating. It's the exact negation of what Einstein just said.
Well, I would have to agree with Christopher Hitchens that religious people can sometimes be irritating, having dealt with many of them and being one myself. I think what I would want to say is that we can look at the wonder of creation, or that's perhaps begging the question, of the universe as it is, and we can get to the point of saying either that's all there is and it is wonderful, or we can get to the point of saying there must be something beyond this, some sort of God, can't be proved, but one can't say that it doesn't matter whether there is that God or not.
Coming right back with Christopher Hitchens and Mark Roberts on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt on the Great God Debate Day on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Dr. Mark Roberts, author most recently of Can We Trust the Gospels, New Testament scholar, and pastor, author, blogger. Christopher Hitchens on the other side, author of, most recently, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Pretty famous atheist. This proposition, number 2, goes to you first, Dr. Roberts. All religions have done cruel things at some times, and some religions have been cruel almost continuously. But neither fact proves that all religions are cruel or that some religions do not reject cruelty, at least in theory, all the time. True or false? True.
You want me to elaborate?
Yep.
Yeah. One of the things that is certainly true, and Christopher Hitchens is an incredible collector of things that religious people have done that are terrible. And I've got to say, having read